Hello and welcome to the show. Good afternoon. Nigeria celebrates workers today, and we at Business Incorporated join in and say well done to our workers, well, myself included. Welcome to the program. I'm Ini John Mekwa. Coming up on the show today, Pfizer to ship 4.5 million COVID-19 vaccine doses to South Africa by June. Kenya lifts domestic movement restrictions as COVID-19 cases fall. Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa sign MOU. Well, it's the first show for the month of May, and we begin with market numbers. First, in South Africa, where the JSE began the first trading day in the red, as the JSE declined 0.76% at intraday. Meanwhile, the market in Nigeria closed for a public holiday, but ended Friday's session positive by almost 1%. The market in Egypt is also closed today for national holiday, marking the beginning of spring. The EJX 30 ended Wednesday's session negative by 1.10%. as the market has been closed for a holiday on Thursday and Sunday. It was a different picture in the Middle East, where markets we track are all open with mixed sentiment at intraday. In the UAE, Dubai's index jumped 1.14%, while the Abu Dhabi index added 0.29%. Elsewhere in the Gulf region, the Qatari index rose 0.34%. On the flip side, Saudi Arabia's market was the only laggard at intraday by 0.31%. In Europe, European stocks rose this morning on the first trading day of May, with the UK closed for the public holiday. Chelsea Dolan is standing by at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange to bring us up to speed with more development from the European scene. Hello, Chelsea. Thank you so much for joining us. So the Vice President of ECB says the bank will start phasing out emergency stimulus when vaccinations pick up in the region. Tell us more about this.
Well, this has been one of the big discussions here in Frankfurt over the past couple of weeks. When will the European Central Bank start taking some of this stimulus spending off the table? The ECB has a 1.8 trillion euro stimulus program in the works right now. They've been buying a lot of bonds of companies, of governments, and that's keeping really the European economy growing. So they've basically reduced interest rates, and that's allowing a lot of borrowing, but also a lot of spending. So this is very important to keeping the European economy on its feet. But now that we are starting to see vaccine rates pick up, now that these discussions are starting to take place about reopening the economy, that's also raised the question of when will the ECB take their foot off the stimulus pedal. For now, it seems that the ECB is going to remain quite cautious. We did hear from the Vice President of the ECB that when vaccination rates get higher, they will need to think about paring back stimulus. But last week, we also heard from the President of the ECB, Christine Lagarde, that it's much too early to be having these conversations over tapering, because right now only about a fourth of the Europeans have gotten a vaccine. There's still a lot more to do to get us to the point of reopening the economy, and even then, it might take longer for the economy to fully recover. So they will have a meeting in early June. That's when these discussions are likely to begin over when they should start paring back stimulus. But for now, the European economy is really still in flux, and most policymakers think that it will need support for the coming months.
Equality today in Germany, as Belen Garia has taken over as CEO of German pharmaceutical giant Merck, making her the first woman to run a German blue chip company. Why has it taken so long?
Well, like a lot of countries, Germany has really struggled to improve diversity, particularly among the higher leadership roles for its biggest companies. This is for a lot of various reasons that other countries are experiencing as well, but Germany also has quite a conservative business culture, so that's been another factor behind this. But we have started to see that shift, and the appointment today of Ms. Carrillo is really an important step forward. She is the first woman to ever lead one of the DAX 30 companies, so the 30 biggest companies in Germany, by herself. Another company, SAP, the German software company, had a co-CEO that was a woman, but for Ms. Carrillo, this is really a milestone. There are a lot of other efforts that are in the works here in Germany as well to improve diversity in the corporate space. Last year, the government introduced a new law that would require executive boards to have at least one woman on them if they're above a certain size. But even so, Germany still has one of the biggest wage gaps in Europe. It still has a much lower representation for women on these executive boards. So there still is a lot of work to do for Germany in terms of gender diversity.
And new data released this morning in European manufacturing. The industrial sector has powered the European economy as many countries remain in lockdown. How did the sector fare in April?
Well, it fared very, very well. The economists behind this report said it was a stellar month for European factories. And as you said, the European industrial sector has really been the backbone of the European economy throughout the pandemic, as we've seen services sectors shut down because of lockdown. So restaurants, bars, retail, hotels, factories have really been the only part of the economy that's been driving growth. So that's continued through April. We actually saw this measure of industrial activity hit a record in data that goes back to 1997. And that's in part because demand from abroad for European goods is very, very strong right now. So exports to China, exports to the U.S., that's really benefiting a lot of European manufacturers. But they also say that domestic demand is starting to pick up as well. So now that we're getting further along in the vaccination efforts, now that we are starting to have these conversations about reopening economies, that's starting to help this manufacturing sector as well.
All right, Chelsea, thank you so much for the update, and I enjoy the rest of your day. We move on now to Asia, where stocks in Asia Pacific slipped in early trade, with major markets in China and Japan closed for the holidays. In Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index was among the biggest losers regionally, as it fell around 1.5% as of its final hour of trading. South Korea's Kospi shed 0.66% to close at 3,127.20. Over in Australia, the S&P AX 200 ended the trading day slightly higher at 7,028.80. MCX Broadest Index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan dipped 0.78%. Investors in Asia-Pacific continued monitoring the COVID situation in India as the country continues to battle a deadly second wave of infections. Markets in Japan, China, and Thailand are closed today for holidays. And on the Wall Street, U.S. stock futures moved higher as investors readied for the first trading day of May. Dow futures rose about 125 points. S&P 500 futures gained 0.39%, and Nasdaq 100 futures rose 0.09%. Today marks the first trading day of May. Despite Friday's weakness in equities, the S&P 500 notched its third straight month of gains in April, adding more than 5% to the index as investors bet on a big economic and profits recovery from the pandemic. The S&P 500 is now up 11% for the year. The benchmark closed at record levels on Thursday on the heels of blowout earnings results from Apple and Facebook. The Dow rose about 2.7% last month, while the Nasdaq Composite gained 5.4% in April. Investors will also be monitoring the next batch of corporate earnings, while manufacturing PMI data for April will be released later today, followed by ISM manufacturing. In the oil market, prices fell in early trade today as the second wave of COVID-19 pandemic in India cut short a recovery in oil demand there, offsetting optimism about a strong rebound in consumption in developed countries and China in the second half of the year. Brent crude futures for July fell 0.7% to $66.28 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate for June was at $63.11 a barrel, down 0.7%. State-level restrictions aimed at stemming infections in India have led to a drop fuel sales in the world's third largest consumer in April. Meanwhile, globally, the rollout of vaccination campaigns is expected to lift oil demand, especially during peak travel season in the third quarter, prompting analysts to increase their forecast for Brent prices for a fifth straight month. And in the commodities market, gold prices ticked higher today, supported by a muted dollar ahead of a series of U.S. data, while auto catalyst metal palladium held firm after surpassing $3,000 per ounce on concerns over supply shortage in the previous session. The dollar index was down 0.1% against its rivals, making gold less expensive for other currency holders. Among other precious metals, silver was steady at $25.90 per ounce, while platinum was up 0.3% at $1,202.17. In Kenya, the country has lifted restrictions on movement in and out of the capital, Nairobi, and 4 other counties after a drop in COVID-19 infections. According to the President, Uhuru Kenyatta, the restrictions in movement between the nation's worst affected areas imposed in late March has resulted in a decline of 72% in COVID-19 cases. President Kenyatta adds that other measures to curb the spread of the virus, including restrictions on eating out and a curfew, will also be relaxed. The resumption of sporting activities will be subject to regulations issued by the Ministries of Health and Sports. However, the ban on political gatherings remain in place. Apart from Nairobi, other areas in the country affected by the restrictions were Machakos, Kiambu, Keja, and Nukuho. And the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization and the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa have signed a memorandum of understanding for future collaboration to promote agricultural infrastructure development, skills training for women and youth, as well as advanced climate-smart agriculture in Africa. According to FAO Director Dr. Ku Dongyu, Africa is a top priority, and the organization seeks to modernize Africa's agriculture to make it more efficient, inclusive, and sustainable. The MOU formalizes and extends an enduring cooperation relationship between the two entities, as well as stronger partnership to scale up Africa's food systems. The MOU also covers private sector engagement in agriculture, market information, agricultural value chains development, scaling up production and productivity for pastoralists, as well as spheres for collaboration. The African Development Bank has approved a grant of $31.2 million to support Ethiopia's effort to increase nutrition and end stunting among children under 5 years. The Development Finance Institution explains that the newly approved fund will go to a project that aims to boost access to services for improved health, more diverse and nutritious food, and improving knowledge, attitude and practices on feeding, nutritional care and hygiene. The scheme, known as Multi-Sectoral Approach for Stunting Reduction Project, targets 40 districts in the country's Amhara and Tigray regions. The project, with a total cost of $48 million, has 3 components, which consist of climate-proofed infrastructure development for effective service delivery, livelihood support, production and promotion of nutritious food, and strengthening institutional systems and capacity building. According to AFDB, child nutrition remains a significant development challenge in Ethiopia, and nearly 50% of children under the age of 5 are afflicted by stunting in the project. We'll take a short break now. When we come back, we'll bring you more stories across the continent. Stay with us. Welcome back. We now go to South Africa, where Pfizer Incorporated will ship 4.5 million doses of its COVID-19 vaccines by June, helping the nation ramp up its inoculation drive. That's according to the country's Minister of Health, who says the first 325,260 doses arrived on Sunday night, while the government also expects Johnson & Johnson to release stock from the Aspen Pharmacare Holdings plant by the middle of May, following a verification process with regulators. South Africa, which is the worst affected country by coronavirus pandemic on the continent, lags behind the emerging market pairs in vaccination. The country halted J&J vaccines after health agencies last month called for their suspension in the U.S. The J&J shot is a key element to the nation's vaccination plan and has already been used to inoculate health workers with no reported adverse effects. And still talking health now, while his mother battled cancer, Goitse Konopi struggled to find a reliable supply of quality medical cannabis for her oncology plan. After her death in 2014, Konopi decided to start growing a 100% black-owned company that produces medical cannabis for exports. Let's watch the story of Konopi. Goitse Konopi never imagined he would be growing cannabis for a living. But the struggles with accessing medical cannabis before his mother died from cancer in 2014 left him looking for ways to make quality reliably available. Those answers led him to start Self-Grown, a 100% black-owned company that produces medical cannabis for export. In the middle of his 17-hectare farm, the 29-year-old has a sizable cannabis tree which contains the indigenous Rooibos and Swazi Gold genetic that he uses to cultivate his cannabis.
We are youth-owned, black-owned, African-born, and we are one of the smaller players, in the context of we haven't raised large institutional capital from existing players from Canada or the like. We've largely raised from African venture capitalists who backed our vision and were aligned with our vision.
Due to strict regulations and processes in South Africa, Konopi's dream of being able to sell cannabis for public consumption recently came to life after acquiring domestic and international licenses to cultivate, process, manufacture, distribute, and export THC, CBD, and CBG containing products. CBD is the non-psychoactive ingredient in marijuana, which is said to relieve anxiety, while CBG is used for treating pain, inflammation, and in cancer treatments.
We spent about 7.5 million rand, and that went into cultivation, building the facility, the standard operating procedures, the guidelines that you need to conform to, the policies and processes that you are navigating. All of that was costly.
The company's first international clients are based in Australia, Israel, Germany, and Poland. Konopi will be exporting packaged high THC dry cannabis flower, retailing in pharmacies and licensed medical cannabis clinics in 1 gram, 3 grams, and 5 grams formats.
In Australia, for instance, the company that we're working with has a chain of cannabis dispensaries, not only in Canada but also in Australia. So they've got cannabis clinics where you walk in, you'd see a physician. The physician would give you a prescription. From that prescription gets filled in the dispensary. And those are the kinds of partnerships that we're working with. So in Europe, we're working with a pharmaceutical distributor where it's about exporting the product to them, where they then wholesale it to pharmaceutical or to pharmacies in their jurisdiction, and they then make their margin and we make ours.
Konopi is negotiating to export CBD-infused ready-to-drink beverage line that will include THC for the Canadian market, where Cannabis 2.0 was recently legalized. Southgrown is currently experimenting to create pharmaceutical compounds that treat the conditions and symptoms of many ailments, such as appetite loss, cancer, epilepsy, and mental health conditions like schizophrenia and post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, still staying in South Africa now, our correspondent Makwa Masalela is standing by to bring us up to speed with developments in the country. Hello, Masalela. Good afternoon. Okay, so South African Airways business rescue is finally over as the business rescue practitioners hand over the airline to its interim board. Is all well with SSA? Is there still any issue left untouched at this time?
Still have serious, important issues to deal with, like they're still looking for a strategic partner and they're still looking for money worth around 3.5 billion South African rand to be injected as part of working capital. So they still have a long way to go before they can even start flying, because even as it is now, we don't know when will they resume flying. Remember, they've been grounded for almost a year. And even their subsidiary Mango, last week or so, they had issues. They were grounded for a day and they nearly went into business rescue because they didn't have money to pay the operator or the regulator, which is Airport Company of South Africa.
Well, moving from airlines now, let's talk about power in South Africa. Eskom is warning that electricity supply could be affected if wage talks reach a deadlock as workers' union demand up to 15% in salary increase. What's the current power situation in the country and how are the talks going?
Well, and anyway, our electricity issue has ever since been this elephant in the room, and we know whether they've got salary negotiations or not. Our electricity supply has not been reliable. We've been experiencing serious load shedding. We've also been experiencing an increase when it comes to tariffs. So yes, the wage talk, should the guys maybe down the tools, definitely it will exacerbate the situation, but they have to find a way to reach an agreement. Bearing in mind that as it is now, Eskom has got a huge debt. Eskom doesn't have money. Eskom is not performing greatly. So, but you cannot blame that on the poor workers, because the workers have been doing their part. Even during COVID times, they've been there. So the troubles that Eskoms are facing today is all purely because of the management decisions that they've been making, poor management decisions.
Well, a little bit of good news, at least the Department of Mineral Resources has announced a drop in fuel price for the month of May. I would say a lot of South Africans are happy about this.
That we've been experiencing almost petrol hikes for the past 6 months or so. So this is welcome news, especially knowing that South African consumers are still struggling. Most of them have lost their jobs. Those who still have jobs, unfortunately, some had to experience some salary decreases. So yes, definitely this will help us going forward. And we hope that the rand will continue to strengthen against the US dollar, and then we'll continue to see this kind of petrol price decreases. And also it's going to talk to our inflation, meaning our inflation will remain low, so lessening the chances of our Reserve Bank to start increasing interest rates.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Masalela. Makwe Masalela is the Chief Investment Officer at Makwe Fund Manager. Thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on happenings in South Africa. Well, we'll move from South Africa to Ghana, where the Securities and Exchange Commission says it has paid 768.26 million cedis to 6,916 claimants who signed up for the full bailout program as at the 31st of March 2021. According to the Director General of SEC, 6,349 individuals were paid 409.29 million cedis, while 562 corporates and institutions institutions received 358.68 million cedis. The SEC DG adds that for the partial bailout, a total of 64,685 out of 89,233 claimants had signed up for the program by executing the assignment and subscription agreement as at the 31st of March. Actual payments made under the partial bailout program as at the 31st of March stood at 995 million cedis to 52,664 claimants, representing 81% of total claimants and 83% of the total corresponding partial bailout value. And that's it for the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Ini John Mekwa.